Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Joining us on this occasion is Justino Carneiro, who's an academic researcher at the Institute of Philosophy of the University of Porto, Portugal. He was formerly an assistant professor of biopolitics in the master's degree of history, international relations, and cooperation at the University of Porto, and is currently finishing his PhD on political theology as a metaphysical system. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Justino.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a big pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. I guess we first learned about each other through Yuri Roshka's Chisinau forum, where we both participated virtually, and I very much enjoy your analysis, where you're coming from. And I guess before getting your answers to the big questions of the day, anything you'd like to add about yourself, the work that you're doing?
Well, about the Chisinau Forum, it's a wonderful event, yearly event, which gathers many, very important researchers, I would say, in the fields of geopolitics and also what I like to call conspirology, which is really, in my view, a science and not something speculative. Well, about myself, my background is in philosophy. It's in political philosophy, but also I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I would say that my favorite topic or subject is really theology. That's what I really like. But so even in my PhD, I'm trying to reconcile somewhat those two fields. Precisely in the area or discipline of political theology, and I base my work on the work of Carl Schmitt in that regard. But I don't follow him in everything. But he's a main reference from myself and from my work, and in the way that I can combine politics and theology also.
No, actually, for me, that's one of the reasons I asked you to come on. That's also that's sort of my main focus as well. Maybe I should rename the podcast Geopolitics, Empire, and Theology, because I think that really gets to the hearts of the biggest questions of our day. Geopolitics, which today has become, as you say, conspirology. I mean, the study of deep politics, right? Over a decade ago, I interviewed Peter Dale Scott, who I think he coined the phrase deep politics, parapolitics, and because that's how the world really works. And maybe just to start, the big question, is I think people know my view of how I see the world. In your mind, what is going on? I just see basically there is this global elite, and they have a bid for world empire, total world domination for the first time in history. I think the world has become globalized enough, and technology has developed to a point where we are at the cusp of seeing for the first time in all of history a true world empire that spans the entire planet, of which is referenced in the biblical texts. And so just maybe starting there, what are your thoughts of what's going on, big picture in the world?
Yeah, so I would say that as an Orthodox Christian, my view is really based on eschatology, ultimately, in my perception of history and political events, historical events, geopolitical events. So, my view on globalism, for instance, I see globalism from this biblical Christian prism, eschatological prism, but also I would say prophetological, because in Orthodox Christianity we have prophecies from the saints, and in the light of these prophecies also we understand historical events and historical progress and the historical trajectory of humanity and modernity up to of course the final goal, the negative goal of history in the reign of the Antichrist. So I would say that I equate and identify the globalization and globalism with this ultimate goal of the reign of the Antichrist.
No, I feel this is the same way, and we can get further into some of this stuff. Sometimes people call us a black pilled, but I feel like there is this. It's been foretold. This now you're seeing in alt media, and we can talk about this as well. These occult influences who are saying things like, the elite wrote the Bible and the prophecies to make this happen, and I just see it as an inverse, that God knows everything, and he foretold. He's like, look, this is going to happen. It's and it's happening. So it's a prophecy in true sense of that, the definition of that word, and where history is progressing towards this end where it's going to get worse and worse as we move towards this totalitarian world state. No?
Yes, I agree. But that's a difficult topic. I agree that to some extent, the elites are using prophecy as a script. And I think it's a bit complicated to understand what is this really about. But I would say that the issue is that the devil doesn't have creativity, so he can only copy and parasitize. So that I think that's a big part of it in this regard.
Who just any further thoughts of this trajectory, how you see things developing? Because now we're seeing integrations of regions, right? Mm-hmm. The European Union, which is a totalitarian supranational superstate, and now it's the model for this totalitarian technocratic world government. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. Just last week, Project Syndicate published an article talking about their desire to move towards planetary governance, and that the EU is their blueprint for this supranational federation. Now you're seeing the move under the Trump administration to integrate North America. Putin, a lot of people, especially in the Orthodox world, hail Putin. But, my former employer, Nursultan Nazarbayev, worked for 4 years in Kazakhstan. Supposedly, Nazarbayev came up with, in 1994, with the Eurasian Union idea, which Putin is slowly trying to push forward. But you find academic articles that say Eurasian Union is literally a copy of the EU, right? So is the North American and the Central American and the South American and African Union and Southeast Asian Union. And so I'm looking at that a lot. Just what are you looking at when it comes towards this, on this trajectory that we're moving forward in?
Yeah, I know that you have spoken about this a few times. Of course, it's really impressive to see the synchronicity between the 10 kingdoms from chapter 19, I believe, of chapter 17 of Revelation, and these 10 regions that you see in many in the Club of Rome as well, but also in different federalist conceptions and views. So, well, that's I would say that's a first point that I would make about that, which is really something to behold. But I would say that it's important about the general issue of multipolarity, that so you see some multipolarist people, authors, even in the more descriptive or analytical from side, or even the more activist ones, you see them making this big distinction between multipolarity and unipolarity. And they equate globalism with unipolarity. And I think this is a big mistake, because unipolarity is localized, right? It's a hegemonic dominion of a power over the others. So you could say that for a period, the United States of America was a hegemon, a geopolitical hegemon. But now we see that that's no longer the case, I would say. You see the rise of BRICS, of course, but the issue is that, does this multipolar alternative really, can I say, does it really present an alternative to globalism? I don't think so. I don't think that's the case, and I think that the COVID-19 operation. There are many names for it: scandemic, pandemic. Was the proof of this. It showed that all of these countries, they had the same approach, and what's really behind it, it's, I would say, technocracy, of course. So it's not necessary for globalism to have the shape of unipolarity, because we see that. So if different regions, if different geopolitical powers have the same, can I say, the same policy, a technocratic policy, and they ultimately lead to the same regime, technocratic regime. So this is what globalism is all about, finally. So I don't agree that multipolarity really presents an alternative to globalism. I think that it's the same. It's part of that same trajectory.
Maybe to explore that a bit further, I call multipolarity, I mean, we can call it globalism 2.0, right?
Yeah.
Or it's if I've tried to explain it in my head a few different ways. One way of looking at it is, the unipolar Bretton Woods model attempted to take as much of the earth as it could, through I've interviewed John Perkins, the economic hitman, and the way that this new form of empire after World War II worked, right? It worked more invisibly behind the scenes, where they hijacked countries as vassals behind the scenes. NGOs took over the economic systems of countries, and so before it was by force, but it's the same thing. And so it took over a large swath of the world. And multipolarity, Belt and Road, BRICS. It's that portion of the world that they can't get to, Global South. That's BRICS's job, and people do away with these inconvenient facts of BRICS being coined by a young global leader of World Economic Forum, with Jim O'Neill, the Goldman Sachs banker, and then, as you say, it's rolling out this technocracy. So I just see it as the next advance towards world government, and further thoughts on that, but also, I mean, I like how Yuri calls Kremlin the collective Kremlin, right? Or Beijing, and I don't see any hero in anyone, in Putin or Xi Jinping. Again, these multipolaristas, they have, I think, both, some of them unwittingly, but others witting myopia. They talk about 9/11 in the West as false flag operations. Like, look, I believe the 1999 Moscow apartment bombings were a Russian false flag. So it's kind of like, and then, collective Kremlin is implementing mass surveillance and technocracy. And so you talk to the multipolaristas in China. I've interviewed some of them, and one will say, "Oh no, there's no social credit system." Meanwhile, I hear reports. You see different reports of people being debanked and all that. So it's like, well, obviously there is something like that, and it's here in the West as well. And then, or others will say, yes, there is a social credit system in China, but it's a wonderful thing. It's a good thing, and just kind of like, just any thoughts here?
Yeah. So in the case of Russia, of course, you know that Edward Slavscott does a great work on detailing these can I say, this process of implementation of CBDC, even the digital ruble. We saw it during COVID, and many people were blind to it. I don't know, myopic, like you said, but we saw that they implemented the same kind of measures, and so yeah. Well, also, maybe I would reframe it also in a broader, can I say, geopolitical landscape, this issue, because of course we even appealing a bit to the work of Carl Schmitt, because he has this book called Land and Sea. If we go back to the 19th century and the Great Game, the so-called Great Game between the Atlanticist powers and the Eurasian powers, this was a real struggle. And I think, to some extent, it is a real struggle. It's not like it's a puppet theater. and different people have different views about this. Some say that it's a competition for the same. So there's a consensus on technocratic governance, but there's a competition for a hegemonic position in that field. But so maybe we see maybe we are witnessing the end of the classical thalassocratic world dominion, which was typical of the British Empire, and a reversion to a more tellurical centric world, which is more in tune with this multipolar configuration of geopolitical power. But in this regard, I would also say that the Israel plays a big role in this evolution of events. And we can see from a certain perspective that Israel is more and more gradually becoming the center of this Eurasian configuration, world configuration. That is a bit my view.
So then another question there. There's so many questions here, but how do we assign weight to these actors? We talk about the West, Washington, London, Brussels, collective Kremlin, Beijing, Israel, in this grouping of this occultocracy, so to speak. Just your further thoughts on where should we be looking for, who has more weight in terms of importance, and then just your further thoughts then on Israel. And does this then kind of have to do overlap, as we said earlier, we're moving towards this end, and thus Israel has to become more important as a result of, both what the Bible says, but also what the elites are attempting, right? They're talking about a third temple, which, Christians shouldn't be egging on. I believe in the Bible as prophecy, it says a third temple will be rebuilt, but it's for the Antichrist. It's not for, It's not like we should be wanting that to happen. Just, further thoughts on Israel.
Yeah. So that's, I see that we have this more known collusion between the British Empire and Zionism. This is known. It started, it has a long history, but maybe it started becoming more, how can I say, these two powers became more aligned maybe during the end of the 18th century, 19th century. And this played a major role, of course, in the evolution of the events during the 20th century. Both world wars had, as a direct result, the consolidation of Israel. Right, the First World War. The result was, Palestine passed from the Ottoman Empire to the British Empire, mandatory Palestine, and this was ceded to the Zionist powers, through the Balfour Declaration, of course, addressed to Lord Rothschild. We know that Lord Rothschild, Walter Rothschild, if I'm not mistaken, was the major financier behind the Round Table, Cecil Rhodes Round Table, and Milner's Kindergarten. So in the Second World War in 1948, you have the official foundation of the State of Israel. So I see these two events as a direct consequence of the collusion between the British Empire and Zionism. Of course, this was prepared, in my view, also before that through Freemasonry. So we know there's this book, Builders of Empire, that shows how Freemasonry was really the networking support of the British Empire. And also there's a few good researchers, because you find in conspiracy theory, let's say, this idea that Freemasonry, and it's really a Judaic psyop. But you have many easy, facile approaches to this. But I have found that there's a marvelous book which really has the smoking gun, in my view, but it's not so well known because it's French. It's from this pseudonymous author called Louis de Maistre. It's a book which starts analyzing the life of René Guénon. I don't know if you know him or if you've heard of him. He's an important author. He's considered to be the founder of the traditionalist school, or perennialism, which is this idea that all religions have a common esoteric unity, transcendental unity of religions. And he himself spoke of something which was really obscure in his writings, which was counter-initiation. And he had this view that there were in all traditions, all traditional religions, there was this esotericism that had, it gave the possibility of man to overcome his conditioned state through initiation, in the mysteries. But he saw at the same time that there were the adversaries of these initiates, who were what he called the counter-initiates. And according to him, these counter-initiates were behind Freemasonry, but also the Theosophical Society, like this idea of the ascended masters, the secret chiefs, and occultism. For René Guénon, they were these counter-initiates, but he himself believed that this had a historical relationship with Judaism. But really, this book, Louis de Maistre, the title of the book is in French, René Guénon, something like René Guénon and the Unknown Superiors. But he showed, also based on the work of Marsha Keith Shishard, that Sabbatian and Frankist Jews were really responsible for the creation of the so-called higher rites of Freemasonry. The rites that go beyond the level of master. And this was centered, for instance, in the 18th century in the figure of Samuel Falk, also called Baal Shem of London, who was a Sabbatian Jew. And he had this whole network, international network of Sabbatian agents, and many famous characters like Cagliostro and the Baron von Hund and others. They were really agents of Samuel Falk. Marsha Keith Shishard, she explains this and really shows it very academically, let's say, very scholarly. And so there is this influence behind Freemasonry. And you see that if Freemasonry, which was always, like I said, this networking basis for the British Empire, it was at the same time penetrated by Sabbatianism. So you see that this what can I say? This connection, this unity of effort between the British Empire and Sabbatianism was very important very early on. And so also we need to know that going back to the eschatological perspective, also on the current events with Israel, that the Sabbateans, they were from the beginning. Of course, we know that there was this figure, a very well-known figure, Sabbatai Tzvi, who proclaimed himself the Jewish Messiah in 1666. But it didn't mean that he was really seen as the final Messiah. In any case, Sabbateanism was always a very declaredly messianic movement, and they considered early on that all the Jews that were not actively trying to hasten the coming of the Messiah were part of this mixed multitude, the Erev Rav. And they consider that the Sabbateans, that only those Jews that were actively contributing to the hastening of the Messiah, of the coming of the Messiah, were true Jews, and the others were not true Jews. And of course, we know that what defined Sabbateanism was this doctrine of redemption through sin. So even Gershom Scholem, who is a really academic authority on this, recognized by everyone, it's not like it's some conspiracy theorist or something, he described it as an antinomian movement, which is also interesting if we think about the word antinomianism, and we think about Carl Schmitt's idea of nomos of the earth. And nomos is a really Greek term that can be translated as law, but it's not the best translation. It's a kind of law and order, and it's for Schmitt it was a spatial order. But this word goes back to Scripture precisely, because when we speak about the mystery of iniquity or the mystery of lawlessness, really the word in Greek is anomia, enemy, right? And if we connect this idea of redemption through sin as an antinomian movement, well, in my view, this is really the same as what's being, of course, it can't be reduced only to that, but what Second Thessalonians calls, the Apostle Paul calls the mystery of iniquity, the mystery of enemy, it can be really, it's like redemption through sin, as this increasing and this intensifying of the messianic fulfillment. It coincides with the mystery of enemy that St. Paul speaks about. But yeah, this it's a very it's a really deep subject, I would say, with many implications and many consequences.
I'm only vaguely familiar with some of the things you're touching on, but when you say redemption through sin, their view is inverse to then the biblical worldview, right?
Yeah.
So they want to no morals, and they just go nuts, basically, do whatever you want. Is that sort of it?
Yeah, the idea is that if evil increases in the world, this leads to the end of history, which is really the messianic fulfillment. Of course, this has many metaphysical presuppositions, and in the Kabbalah, of course, in Lurianic Kabbalah as well, because the Sabbateanism came out from Lurianic Kabbalah. I don't know if maybe it's a bit too technical, but suffice it to say, I would say that it's this idea that so the world is in they wouldn't say well, yeah, they could say that the Kabbalists, they would say that the world is in a fallen state, but they describe it in a completely different way from Christians, and they speak of what they call the tikkun, or tikkun olam, the reparation of the world. And this is very typical of Hasidic Judaism, that their goal in life is to contribute to the tikkun, to the reparation of the world, which is the ascension of the sparks of light which are captured in matter to the origin, to their divine origin. And there are different views in Judaism on how this is supposed to happen, how this reparation is supposed to happen. But in the case of Sabbateanism, they believe that like exhausting these so the divine light is captured in matter, and in order to release these sparks of light, they need to take it to the end, the material limitations, which ultimately is evil for them. So it's through the practice of evil that the sparks of light can be released, because this process will be taken to the end. If you combine this with the messianic worldview, that the telos of history is the advent of the Messiah, so these two things would go together, like the practice of sin and the increase of evil will lead to the advent of the Messiah.
That makes me think of what I've seen about Aleister Crowley, for example, in the early 1900s, and some documentaries that I've seen using primary sources where purportedly Crowley wanted to be the beast of the end times, and he wanted to hasten and bring about the biblical end times. And obviously he failed, but then one of the founders of Scientology, it was Hubbard, he sort of wanted to continue that tradition. So we see this strain and these ideas in these different groups that are overlapping. And by the way, it's funny, often my guests will mention a book, and I'm like, oh, what do I got here? Builders of Empire, Freemasonry, and British Imperialism. I've had it on my shelf for years. I haven't read it yet. And so now maybe after you mention it, I'll get to reading it. And this sort of brings, I like to use ideas from all sorts of people from different worldviews, but which come from authorities in their own right, even though I ideologically may disagree with them, but match it to my sort of biblical geopolitical worldview. And, I cite often Mark Passio, who's a former Satanist. I believe he's looking at his language, he continues to be sort of a Gnostic in some sort of sense. But he tries to define this global elite as an occultocracy that includes a number of factions. And for me, that's my favorite way of seeing it, because if you mention you got Freemasonry, you got Jesuits, you got Zionists, you got the British elites. I guess the collective Kremlin is plugged in. You've got the Saudi Arabian lobby, right? Saudis building the ultimate Babylon in the desert with Neom. And so basically everyone is plugged into this world global sort of system and structure. Just any further thoughts on how you would describe or look at the elite? Who's controlling the world? And for me, basically the most important, we can talk all day about these human groups, but ultimately it's Satan. This Lucifer. It's an actual entity. It's a real personality. He's going to and fro across the earth. People always get stuck at it's the Jews, and it's like, okay, but why don't you ever talk about the ultimate guy running the show? Obviously, God is above that, and he wins. But just any further thoughts on the elites and how they manage to corral, the Mexican government and the Chinese to all work together towards this one end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned Crowley, and one thing that I would say, for me, this is obvious. I have studied this a little bit, occultism and Kabbalah. And one thing that you can really see is that, Western occultism and magic, what's really behind it, it's Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, they call it practical Kabbalah, but it's really magic. And this is present in Freemasonry. Many of the Masonic rituals are really based on Kabbalistic notions, and in Western magic, it's very obvious, like the practice of sigils and the role of the Kabbalistic tree and the Sephiroth. All of these things come from the Kabbalah. But so maybe going a bit back in history, also, and this is my perspective as an Orthodox Christian, because in order to understand the Western modernity, I think it's good, and for me it was really a revelation when I started reading more about the so-called Byzantine perspective on this. I mean, the Eastern Roman Christian view of history as well. And this, my main reference in this is Father John Romanides. He was a theologian, priest, theologian, Greek American, but also a historian. And he has very, very interesting historical theses, I would say. The book that it's a book you can find on the internet. It's called Franks, Romans, Feudalism, and Doctrine. So, and according to his view, Western Christianity is really a distortion of the original unity of Christianity that was consolidated in the Roman Empire. You mentioned it a bit before, like this idea that Christianity itself was a psyop, and the ecumenical councils were like instituted Christian religion. You have, I think this is nonsense, of course. Have many neo-pagan views as well on this. I don't agree at all with those views. So for me, the way I see it, really the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity was how can I describe it? It was really, first it was a miracle. I believe, and as an Orthodox Christian, I believe really that Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, he really had a vision that was granted by God, and the conversion of the Roman Empire was providential, was part of divine providence, and it allowed Christianity to spread. If we really believe that Christianity is the salvation presents the salvation of mankind, without this spreading of Christianity through the Roman Empire, many people will be outside of this, and of this possibility. And so you had this initial unity between East and West with the Roman Empire. Of course, Constantine himself, he changed the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, which was a newly founded city, founded as a Christian city, because Rome was pagan and marked by pagan history, and he himself, Constantine, had difficulties in dealing with the pagan elites of Rome, and there was a conflict as well there. So the Roman Empire founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople, which really it will play still, like currently Istanbul will play a major geopolitical role as well. It has a very, very important geostrategical position in the world that we will see unfold with current events, I believe. But what happened is that really there's after the fall of Rome, through the barbarian invasions, you have this increasing consolidation of a power which are the Franks. So we see a big difference between what would become Western Christianity, that we see as being constituted really beginning with Charlemagne, which is a Germanic foundation of or view of Christianity, and you know that there's a split there. Like it was Charlemagne and his theologians that first dogmatized the filioque, which is really the distinguishing theological dogma between East and West. I will not enter into the theological details, but the way I see it, so also the Catholic Church itself is a Frankish institution. If you look at the schism between East and West in 1054, and if you look at the origins of the popes, of the bishops of Rome, before the schism, the popes were Roman citizens. Like the papal states were still under the authority of the Roman Empire emperor in the East. And there was a big conflict starting with the 8th century and 9th century, where progressively the Franks became a hegemonic power, but it was a conflictual relationship between the Germanic emperor, Charlemagne and his successors, and the Pope. We see, and this is Father John Romanides has this view, that the popes were resisting. They were trying to negotiate with the Franks because the Roman Empire in the East was being attacked by many fronts. So the citizens of Rome, the Romans from Rome, were still, in our view, Orthodox Christians. They didn't have military support from the East, so they had this alliance with the Franks that were able to protect them from Lombards and other Germanic peoples. But if you look at the period of the schism, really around the schism, you see that until the schism, until 1054, you had the popes were all Roman citizens, and after that they were all Franks. This is true. This is a historical fact, and not many people think about the implications of this. So we see that the Catholic Church is really a Frankish institution. And furthermore, I would say that fundamentally, and this is a major thesis in my personal work, and that you have, as an Orthodox Christian as well, that with the foundation of the Catholic Church, which can only be seen as being constituted during that period, starting with Charlemagne, 9th century, up to the schism, you have a loss of grace, a fall from grace. There's a big 20th century saint, Orthodox saint, called Saint Justin Popovich, and he says that there were three major falls of man. The first was Adam, the second was Judas, and the third was the Pope. So in our view, really, Christianity as a religion of control and a matter of power really starts with the Catholic Church. And if you look also at history, and you see that European nobility has its origin. Of course, there are other lineages, but the main component of the European nobility were the Franks. And like in my own research, I see that like orders of chivalry, like the Order of the Garter in England, but there are many orders. There were like this proto deep state, like proto European deep state. And you see that there was also a difference between Christianity for the masses and like the practice of the elites themselves. And there was increasingly, like if you pick up Michael Hoffman's book, the Occult Renaissance Church of Rome, you see that also in this sequence of events, you see an alliance, like an esoteric alliance between the Frankish elites, European nobility, through these orders of chivalry, and Jewish esotericism. and this increasingly becomes really the defining worldview, esoteric worldview of the elites in Western Christianity. So you have this Christianity for the masses, which is really this really harsh view of sin and punishment, which was typical of the Catholic Church, in order to control the masses. And in the elites, you had this Judeo-Christian esotericism, increasingly. But just one final thing about this is that another thing that Father John Romanides says, that, for instance, about the French Revolution, that if you look at the three estates, like in the French Revolution, you had this idea that, well, before the French, in the French monarchy, of one nation, one king, one religion. And the Illuminists, they subverted this idea. That they said, no, there's no one nation. We have here at least two, maybe three nations. You have France as Francia. You have, which is the first estate of nobility. You have the clergy, which is Rome. And you have the people, which is the Gauls. And so they used this distinction between estates in order to propose, to say that the people is everything, but has been considered nothing, right? They are serfs. And the liberation of the people was the liberation of the Gauls from the Franks and from the Roman clergy, the Roman Church. But what Father John Romanides says is that really the people were not the Gauls, like this, which is a historical fetish, really, that they were this innocent the Celts and pagans. No, they were, in the case of France, they were Gallo-Romans. And they were really the descendants of Orthodox Christians. So if we see that there's after, with the constitution of the Catholic Church, with feudalism, with a Frankish hegemonic dominion over European peoples, you see that the people were the descendants of the Christianized peoples in Europe, while the elites, the Franks, were really based on Frankish lineages. But so in the French Revolution, we can see it as the revolt of the descendants of the Orthodox Christians, the Western Orthodox Christians. But this was subverted by Freemasonry, and it was at the same time, because Freemasonry itself was a creation of these same Western elites. You can see it as well as a competition between elites, a change of scenario.
On that point, what I see is, I've interviewed Richard Poe, Dr. Martin Erdmann. He was supposed to come on, but he had a heart attack a few days before. He's still alive. But he comes from the evangelical tradition, but he's written on the metamorphosis of liberalism. So what you're describing here, these Illuminist revolutionary movements, I put them all together: the French Revolution, the British, American, and all of the subsequent, the Mexican, and many others. That the purpose, again, looking forward to look back, reverse engineering. I feel that these revolutions were carried out by these sinister, esoteric groups and elements for the goal of deconstructing this old order, as you explained it, to work towards world state. Because I need to look further into this, but I'm looking at it now just off the cuff, like just logically. How do you have a world empire? It's difficult to do it with these different monarchies. But if you create this model of democratic republic, quote, that can be controlled by capital, right, the oligarchs, and you just copy paste it to all of the territories of the world, and you form these supranational federations, you'll find George Washington, Freemason, a quote from 200 years ago, where George Washington said, "Now that we've created a United States of America, we want to create a United States of Europe, and a United States of the Americas, and a United States of the world." So it just seems like the project was to just any thought on my idea here, and the nature of these revolutions.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I didn't put it as well as you did there. It's this very contradictory. There's this contradictory aspect in this, in the beginning of this new world. Both, like you said, in the United States of America and the French Revolution, because indeed there is a liberation there, I would say, from old forms of tyranny. So it's like there's a gamble from the elites. There was this need to, how can I say, to open up a space. But it's I think the gist is what you said. It's like you had these monarchies, these limited monarchies, different states, and the liberation of society. If we make this distinction between state and society, or the people and the elites, with this democratic aspect to it. That the final goal was the world state, which was no longer limited by monarchical configurations. So it was necessary. It was necessary for the peoples to be released from localized forms of power and dominion in order to constitute or to open up the possibility of something like a world state or a world empire, for sure.
Yeah, and as you said, a lot of these things are paradoxical, and it's hard to square some of the circles. And like when I follow researchers like Erdmann, it's not clear to me yet. We're in this fog. It's the fog of war, the gray zone. But I think he's really onto something, because he calls this democracy it's become this like God today, democracy. He calls it romantic democracy, and he calls it it's mysticism. It's an occult, sort of Luciferian theosophic civil religion. This democracy that we have today, maybe in its initial phase of republic, again, it's conflicting, because it brought us some good things, right? This American, you got Jefferson behind me, this Americana of independence. But then in the same way, it serves the Luciferian idea, where he wants unlimited freedom and liberty. James Lindsay posted something recently, and I disagree with him there, where he says liberty first, but from the Christian, that's kind of like, liberty is good, but when you say there's no limits, boy can be girl can be boy, abortion, just let everything loose. You can see the negative aspects there. I want to go back, and what you were talking about, it's been 20 years since I looked at church history. I need to go back and reread some of that stuff. My just off the cuff view, as you're explaining, is I feel as man is imperfect and corruptible, and as states are, and physics speaks to like entropy, where you have peaks and then declines. I just feel when we go back through thousands of years of history, as you outlined, Christianity builds the Roman Empire, and then it reaches a stage where corruption comes in and it declines, and it just has to constantly be refurbished and reformed to get back right to its correct state, and it's always going to be like that, and so we have to constantly battle the ship's getting off course, and we have to constantly be battling to put it to right the course. Just to get back to geopolitics for a moment, you talked about, I hear in Orthodox circles this talk about a third Rome in Russia. and we talked about BRICS, but there's this talk of a third world war, and I feel the elites are would be happy to go there because, again, you create in their own writings they talk about having a series of wars to finally get people to relinquish their national sovereignty and accept these supranational federal structures. And so the thoughts on, what is this third Rome idea? And do you think we might go to a third world war? Over the weekend, I was talking to some people, it's, I'm not very forceful with my thesis or certain beliefs, where in the book of Revelation, it talks about 200 million, an army of 200 million soldiers, right? And then I found the U.S. military report, U.S. government official report, which they assessed if U.S. went to war with China, they assessed how many, tanks and nuclear weapons China would have, but they also assess what would be the armed male, the military number of Chinese military men that could be raised up by Beijing, and it said specifically 200 million. So you got Book of Revelation throws out that number, 200 million. You got U.S. government report saying China has 200 million able-bodied men. So just thoughts on what is this third Rome, and any thoughts on what happens going forward with, because as you said, because we see them aligned with globalism, but there's this friction between who's going to sit where at the table, and so I could see things popping off eventually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. About the third Rome, this idea. So my worldview is more based in the Greek tradition of Orthodox Christianity, which is really the closest successors of the Eastern Roman tradition of the so-called Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine, this name Byzantine, was a creation of English historians in the 16th to 17th century. So it's not really it's an ideological terminology. It's really Roman, and it goes back to Charlemagne when he tried to make a distinction. He started calling the Eastern Romans Greeks, but this name Greek had a strict connotation of pagan, so idolater. In any case, this idea of the third Rome, like for instance, Father John Romani says the same. We don't accept it so much because we see it as a political ideology. I'm not aware of any Orthodox saint that really proposed this view of the Moscow as the third Rome, because there was. This is I don't know how interesting it is. It's part of history, but suffice it to say that there's a difference. There was a difference between the Eastern Roman tradition and the Russian tradition. And later, the Russian tradition also had some Western influences, even Latin influences through the Ukrainian theological school. This had an impact as well on Russia. So progressively, we see a kind of some Orthodox theologians speak about this as pseudomorphosis of the orthodoxy in Russia, and you always had this conflict between the more how can I say, more the official hierarchy of the church, which was more in alliance with state power, and the monastic, the more charismatic tradition, which goes back to this tradition of prayer and asceticism in the Orthodox Church, which is called hesychasm, which really comes out from Mount Athos, which is the monastic center of Orthodox Christianity in Greece. And you had some missionaries, we could say, coming out of Mount Athos and renewing the authentic tradition of asceticism and prayer in Russia as well. You see this with an Orthodox saint called Saint Paisios Velichkovsky. who was influenced by the saints that compiled the Philokalia, which is really a volume of books that presents this ascetic tradition of Orthodox Christianity. And even some authors like the Slavophiles and Dostoevsky even were influenced by this ascetic current in Russia, which was typical of the monastery of Optina. This just to make a distinction between this more state official political ideology and this more authentic tradition coming from the people. And I would say that this idea of the Third Rome is more a part of this pseudomorphic political ideological appropriation of Christianity. It's not so much representative of Christianity in Russia, even, I would say. But this being said, and I think that current events reflect partly still this difference, because like even Solzhenitsyn, he said that the struggle, the Western struggle against communism, was not really a struggle against communism or the Soviet Union, but was against Russia. And I would make a distinction there between the Russian people and the authentic Russian Orthodox tradition, which is the same. It's common to all Orthodox peoples in Eastern Europe, but not only in Eastern Europe, but all over the world, of course. And this pseudomorphic ideological use of Christianity, for purposes of propaganda and conservative propaganda. And I still think that this plays a major role. And this is part of the deception. Like clearly, the Russian state uses Christianity as an instrument of propaganda, conservative propaganda.
As does the United States.
Yeah.
Right. And so do you think we see the Fourth Reich, as I call it, the new European Soviet, Brussels, the European Union, they're preparing to rearm massively. I think part of the reason is, well, the EU is an empire, number one, as Wolfgang Streeck, the European intellectual, he's like one of the few intellectuals saying, like, this deception again. Like, what is it's a democracy, the EU. It's like, no, it's an empire. It's an empire. We got to be like Solzhenitsyn, it's like, we know that that we know that like it's an empire. Stop fooling us with this game of EU as a democracy. It's this 28 nation monstrosity. And Frau Ursula Gertrude von der Leyen, as I like to refer to her, I've read that might not even be her real name. They always hide where they come from and their roots, but they're preparing to rearm using all of our money. I'm an EU citizen, unfortunately. I'm a Croatian citizen. I don't want to be an EU citizen. No one asked me to. But they, I think one reason is they want to create these military security intelligence digital structures, because people are going to, as things collapse, people are going to get rowdy, and they want to create these structures using our own money to build these military structures to keep us down in case of civil war, civil unrest, or as my past guest William I. Robinson calls it, the global civil war. But also, do you think, I want to get your thoughts on technocracy and transhumanism, but just final thought here, do you think they will march again on Russia and China?
Yeah, so this is also part of the what I called before the prophetological worldview of Orthodox Christianity, because there are many prophecies that speak of a third world war, and between Western powers and this Eastern alliance, Eurasian alliance. So I believe that it's very possible that we'll witness a third world war, like you said, between Europe and Russia, and the United States. But well, from my perspective, ultimately, this will serve the interests of Israel.
And how so?
Yeah, so even going back to what I mentioned previously in Carl Schmitt, Carl Schmitt is a very interesting author because he was aware of these issues. He in one of his books, which is a very personal book that he wrote while he was in prison after the Second World War, called Ex Captivitate Salus, he speaks about technocracy and transhumanism. He mentions many times Aldous Huxley, for instance. He was fascinated with Huxley's Brave New World, but not only. I don't know to what extent he was aware that Huxley himself was part of the elite, but in any case, he saw already the connections between, or this how can I say, the direction that world politics would take with technocracy. Like for him, so he had this scheme. There's this well-known distinction that he made, the so-called concept of the political, that according to him, what defines the political, not exactly politics, but the political itself, it's not the state itself. It's the distinction between friend and enemy. But in one of his writings, called, I don't remember the entire title, but something like the Age of Neutralizations. That's part of the title. He presents this view that there are a series of hegemonic or hegemonic sectors or domains that through history determine the parting of the friend and enemy distinction. So he says that this begins with, as I recall, with the theological sphere or the theological domain sector, and in this domain you have a distinction. You have this enmity. So you have this partition between friend and enemy, and this for him was characterized the European civil wars that led to the Westphalian system. So for him, the state was really the neutralization of these religious civil wars. The modern state neutralized these civil wars, and then you have a constitution of a new sphere. So that you have this hostile relationship between friends and enemies. Then you have a neutralization, which brings peace to this conflict, and you have a new sphere. And so you have this new sphere. For him, the state coincided with metaphysics, which is no longer theology. It's like a neutralized, rational, can I say, a commonality between different denominations, Christian denominations. So we can agree that we have a metaphysical, rational worldview in common. So Christianity becomes a metaphysical worldview, not strictly religious. And this, for him, coincides with the ascension of the modern state. In this, then you have a new conflict in this new sphere, which then is neutralized for him in the economic sphere. And then you have a new conflict in the economic sphere, which for him, Marxism was characterized, like the class struggle was very characteristic of this new partition, hostile partition in the economic sphere. But for him, and this is where I wanted to reach, the last sphere, and there's no other sphere beyond that, is technology. So technology is the last neutralizing factor, which inaugurates a sector, and within this sector, what can I say? The enmity or hostility reaches an extreme point that it can no longer lead to a new neutralization. And this, for him, was expressed in the development of weaponry and nuclear weaponry as well. For him, so given this, he related later in his work this idea of technology as the last neutralizing sphere or domain to technocracy. So all relations of hostility will not overcome the technological dominion of human relationships. And in his last published text, which is called The Legal World Revolution, because he oscillated a bit between different solutions, he tried to propose a new nomos of the earth, because he saw the First World War and first League of Nations, and then of course the United Nations, as inaugurating a completely different how can I say idea of international law and geopolitical configuration of relations between states. But in his last published text, sorry, just to say this, that he tried to propose this idea of Großräume, like great spaces, great geopolitical spaces, as an alternative to this failing model of the state, of the national state. But in his last, so many people get stuck with this, but in his last published text, Legal World Revolution, he saw that technocracy, he called technological progress, but technocracy increasingly infiltrated the states, and even if there are hostile relations between states or conflicts between states, there is no real alternative to technocracy, because the framework will always be the same. And he left the door open, to imagine whether this, it's still within a multipolar shape, or if it's or if it leads really to a world state. But for him, what's essential is technocracy itself. So it doesn't matter if it's multipolar, unipolar, world empire. It's technocratic.
Yeah, I want to go a bit further there, but maybe just one point that has come to mind for me on cope. People who don't really believe in, let's say, God or the world beyond, right? They have to have hope in something, right? And so, just on technocracy, and I want to get your thoughts on this. For me, it's important because I feel like the walls are closing in. I talk about the social credit system, the algorithm ghetto, this digital concentration camp. It's being built all around us. It's advancing. I don't see an escape. Ultimately, my white pill is Jesus. In my view, is kind of like analyze where we are, this trajectory, bat down the hatches, try to find ways to survive, to push it back. But a friend of mine, I posted a meme about Agenda 2030 and a bank account, an ATM, which says you can't take your money out unless you agree with our ideology. And a friend says, Agenda 2030 is dead. And for me, that's a cope. I'm banned from Patreon. I'm banned from PayPal. I can't renew my bank card now because of Agenda 2030. Because now you can only use one form of identification, your voter ID card in Mexico. The Mexican government, the Senate, is having committees, their meetings, their standard Mexican government meetings. And I saw one last week that said, how to implement Agenda 2030. Mexico City is being divided into 15-minute cities. I live in a 15-minute city. They just announced another Mexican state the capital will be made a 15-minute city. And once that is done, the other cities in Sonora will be made 15-minute cities. So there's no way this is dead. It's advancing. Now Bitcoin is being used to create the cashless digital currencies. The EU is activating the digital euro, the entry-exit system, the travel authorizations. So I feel like people, they find ways to cope. And so whether it's saying, oh, it doesn't exist, I'm just going to, it's like in Matrix, Cypher, who wants to go back to living in the Matrix so he can taste that steak. Or just going, before getting to technocracy, along those same lines, you shared this tweet I made based on Yuri Roshka's analysis of Georgescu in Romania, right? It's like we're seeing this same formula play out where they sheep dip dissidents like Trump and Putin and Georgescu, and they get persecuted by the deep state, and then they come back and become presidents, they come to power, and then they implement the same deep state policies. Yeah. And my view there is, again, it's this cope which explains part of the multipolar alt media analysts where they don't have a hope beyond, and so they have to find some hope. Oh, social credit system doesn't exist, or Georgescu is going to save us, when in fact I think the biblical worldview is that there's no hope in humanity or politicians, and we are sort of doomed in the physical plane. Would you agree or disagree there?
No, I agree. Maybe I would just say something about that. Is that so? Also in these prophecies, it is said that there will be this war, but it will not go according to their plans. But what I would say is that for sure this is beyond human powers. So if there is a change, and all the saints say that prophecies are also contingent on human repentance and human alignment with the will of God. But if there is a change in the world, it will not be because of human initiative. But because I would say that it's also, I agree with you. I agree that our ultimate hope is in God, not in man, the princes of man. But I lost my train of thought there a bit.
I'm just curious, like these political figures, do you view them largely as mostly forms of controlled opposition?
Yeah, I do. And it's Georgescu is a curious case, right? Because he was a member of the Club of Rome. But I would say that in that regard, Zionism also plays a big role, because you see that one thing that there is in common between in this conservative opposition is that all of them are favorable to Zionism. And for me, at least, that's a criterion of distinction between what's authentic or not. But yeah, so for sure that if there is a change, I remember what I was going to say. That it's part of the conspiracy, and I call it, following Jean Parvulescu, the conspiracy of non-being. It's part of the conspiracy of non-being to project an all-powerful image of itself. This is part of the revelation of the method as well. And it doesn't mean that it's really like that, even in the political sphere, I would say. But I agree that states are are under control of technocracy. And also from Carl Schmitt's analysis, in the theory of the partisan, which is an excellent book. It's really a very interesting book and fundamental, I would say, to understand our current situation after the Second World War. That so we cannot hope anymore on state solutions, because all states are occupied. The status of states nowadays, it's like this old notion of occupatio bellica. Like you had an occupied state by another power, and this power that was the occupying power then controlled the police, the military, and so the new authority under which the people were was the authority of the occupying power. So I see the same, like similar structure, but no longer. So the occupying power is no longer another state, but it's really the globalist, transnational, technocratic regime. And so it's no longer an issue of horizontal relationships or conflicts between states, but of a vertical relation between the insurgent peoples and the occupying powers that control the state. So we can no longer have hope in state solutions. Everything depends on this vertical relationship. So there is a transnational dominion over the states, but also the possibility of transnational alliance between the peoples. And we know, for instance, in counterinsurgency theorizing and strategies, that it's always a minority from both sides. You see it at this gaining hearts and minds tactic. It's always between the insurgencies, the insurgents, and the counterinsurgents. They are disputing the amorphous mass of people that can go both ways. But of course, they have the upper hand, the elites.
I think you summed it up right there perfectly. That's where we're at. And I've had a few past guests echo the same. I think the late Francis Boyle, in my last interview with him, said the same. Emmanuel Pastrick, who I've had on the podcast, and I think even William Robinson has said that it's the global elites have come together. It's a vertical now. That's the horizontal is a moot point now, and they've come together against us, which are the insurgents. And then on technocracy, how do you see? Patrick Wood wrote a book, The Evil Twins, I think, Technocracy and Transhumanism. So transhumanism is sort of like the further extension of technocracy. And as you say, it seems to be the end game. Huxley mentioned this idea of a final revolution. It's scientific dictatorship, essentially. How do you see this just developing? I just see every day in our daily life and our daily functions, man with machine they are impressing upon us, like obligating us to own a smartphone. You can do less and less daily life functions without a smartphone, without QR codes and facial recognition scanners and artificial intelligence. Pretty soon it will be difficult to remain human or organically. And as I said earlier, pretty soon they're going to have digital control systems for everything. And then if you ideologically oppose any of their narratives, they just shut you off. And it very much echoes that mark of the beast system. I think on one hand, the mark of the beast has always been with us. It's primarily a spiritual reference, right? Do you accept Christ or do you reject Christ? And There have been many times where in Roman Empire there were certificates where if you didn't do what they said, off with your head, or you can't buy or sell. And I just feel like prophecy is cyclical and building, and eventually it becomes this totality, right, and final fulfillment. And it talks about the hand and the forehead, right? And you think of these, you have the palm payments now, or you pay with your face. Yeah. And so there won't even, maybe there will be a chip, maybe there won't. But I think the true meaning from the biblical theological sense is, will you bow down? Will you say, to enter the store, to renew your government documents, you must accept all of these globalist anti-Christian ideas. And so if you say, no, I'm not down with these things, when they go to scan your face or your palm, the payment will not process. You will not have mobility. That's that moment where you say, no, I do not, I reject. I will stay with Christ, regardless if that means I have to starve to death. Or people who will be like, yes, please, just scan, I'll do whatever you say. And then the scan goes through of their face or the palm. Just thoughts on this trajectory of technocracy and transhumanism.
Yeah, we need to resist this, of course, by all means, not to comply, not to accept any of these things. It's a false view that you can take the chip, you can buy and sell and still remain a Christian inside. No, it's not like that, because it's expressed in your actions. And it's really an existential issue. It's becoming urgent, and I think that we are witnessing really, because I believe that during COVID, there was during the COVID operation, there was I wouldn't use awakening. I'm not sure about that word, but there was a union between different people from different views, from even different political sides, and this was progressively undermined, and we see that, like, there was this, or at least I feel like that there was a small hope that people could revolt and resist this, the implementation of this system, technocratic system. But all of these divisions and this new controlled opposition regime that is being implemented makes it more and more difficult for this to happen, for a real resistance to form itself. So I'm a bit pessimist there, but at the same time, like I said, so if you because I believe that there is divine power operating in the world. Of course, this depends on man, depends on the alignment of man with the will of God. But there's always a possibility of these plans to be, to fail. Also, because I don't see, this radical separation between the divine and the world. This will be in the limit, right? In the end, there will be a separation, but until then, I think there is always room for resistance, even worldly resistance. So I wouldn't completely quit on that, but I believe that we may become martyrs. It doesn't mean that we will be successful in political terms, but like I see this happened during the Roman Empire, like you mentioned, during the Roman Empire, there were huge persecutions of Christians. There were many martyrs. But after that, there was a renewal of Christianity. And of course, it was always, like I mentioned, I personally have a very favorable view of the Emperor Constantine. Some people disagree with this, but in the Orthodox Church, we have this view. But it doesn't mean that it was always a peaceful relationship with the state authorities or the Roman Empire. It's always a never-ending struggle. But this just to say that even in political terms, I'm not completely pessimist. At the same time, I don't have hope in the Princes of Man, but still, I don't think the doors are completely closed. And what you said, like this cyclical, like the market of the beast, that we are able to see it in different moments of history. Yeah, we see this as like a spiral. It's not a completely linear movement, but it's we have these like these prophecies. They can work in different moments of history, but they are more and more intensified as the end approaches. So, but again, in that sense, also until the end, there's always room for freedom. Until the effective reign of the Antichrist, there will always be some space for maneuver.
I'd agree with you. And again, my point is from, one of my last questions is sort of like, what do we do? Is number one, we just continue to struggle again. We're not giving up. We're in many ways, in our own ways, struggling against these things. So no one's given up. We're continuing to battle and struggle, and then prepare materially as best we can to jump through these hoops to survive, and then prepare spiritually, because as you say, we're struggling, but there might come a point where we can struggle no more. We've prepared materially. I talk about getting a farm, having some food and water, or friends, networking, like the early Christians did in the first century.
Exactly.
But there may come a point where you run out of cash. You got no more money. You don't have a farm. They come take you on the farm or send drones or whatever. Now you must. That's what the spiritual preparation is for, as you say, martyrdom. Whether it's for refusing to wear a face mask. A Mexican young man in spring of 2020 was killed by the Mexican police for not wearing a face mask. Or for Christians, being killed or whatever. So just any thoughts on, for me, that kind of sums up like the best that we can do. And as you say, hope for supernatural aid, whether it's into individuals or groups or nations, but just any further thoughts there on what we can do.
Yeah, I completely agree. You put it perfectly. I agree with that. But I think it's really urgent for us to establish networks and try to can I say to live on the margin of the system and to start building communities that are as much as possible autonomous and with economic autonomy. I think this is very important because many people are still waiting for the state or to I don't know take power, or this is a complete illusion. If you don't live your life, if you don't have independence and autonomy in your life, and you cannot hope that a miracle will happen and the state will be on your side. So I think it's really fundamental that people establish relationships and communities outside of the state and of the increasing technocratic technologies that are being implemented.
I was trying to find the tweets from that I shared from my recent guests, John Bush and Aaron Day, and they basically said, I can't find them. I retweet and so much on X, but here it is. John Bush says the most important and radical strategy for freedom is agorism and practicing counter economics. And Aaron Day says, don't comply, exit, and build. Everything else is being spectator at a circle jerk or a participant in a circle jerk. And so even, I think that also agrees with what we're discussing. Just real quick to get funky, any thoughts on UFOs, aliens, because this is also a psychological operation that is increasingly being discussed. They just yesterday they announced, spirals in the skies in Russia and in Europe. My view is that the UFO phenomenon are essentially fallen angels, because the Bible says they can appear as lights and different manifestations, and then you have secular experts, non-Christian experts like Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek, UFO experts, authorities who say it's an interdimensional phenomenon. And then you look at movies like Prometheus, Ridley Scott's Prometheus, who they're propagandizing us with this, and so is the alternative media now. That's Gnostic, New Age, Theosophic, who's saying, they're promoting Gnosticism, that the God of the Old Testament is Satan, demiurge, and that some of them have said Jesus is an alien that came down on a UFO. Prometheus in the movie, they say mankind was created in a lab by extraterrestrials, and so it's like this alien UFO psyop is to get us to believe that there are extraterrestrials, so physical beings from outer space that created us. Thus, there is no God. There is no creator. We were created by these aliens. I think that is the deception, and I default to these being actually just Satan and his angels just trying to create this deception. Would you agree, or do you have any thoughts? Have you looked into the whole UFO alien talk?
Well, it's not something that I work so much or that I'm so much interested, but yeah, I agree with what you said. I would really recommend Father Seraphim Rose's book, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, which is a lot about UFOs. There's also a more recent book by Father Spiridon Bailey, also from the Orthodox perspective. The one thing that I would say is that there is even in Revelation you see this idea that the Antichrist will produce heavenly phenomena. And one thing that I would say about that is that the Antichrist will appear as a savior, even possibly as a figure of resistance. And this whole idea of UFOs and aliens, maybe we will see, the kind of spiritual pyrotechnics that will legitimize the rule of the Antichrist. Like UFO phenomena, but massive UFO phenomena that will really appear like alien invasion or something like that, in order to usher or to legitimize the coming of the Antichrist. That's my very intuitive view about this.
Well, fun times await us. Is there any other topic you wanted to bring up, or final thought?
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to say a bit before, and I didn't speak before, like when you mentioned Martin Erdmann, I like a lot his work. I've read the World Federation, which is a very good book. I would recommend it as well. But you spoke about democracy. One thing that I would say is that democracy, in my view, it's really propaganda. And I don't think there are some views, more elitist, that think that really the problem is democracy, which is a kind of degradation of quality and all this stuff. But I think that this is really a psyop and a propaganda from the oligarchical elites, that there is this illusion of freedom of the peoples and the masses. But this is really propaganda for transhumanism. Because one thing that also Carl Schmitt said in that book that I mentioned, Ex Captivitate Salus, is that these texts and these that affirm transhumanism and present it like a promise for mankind, which is really the promise from the serpent in the Garden of Eden. It's the same. This same conception of deification that the devil promised to man, which is a false promise. You see that there's always Schmidt mentioned this, that there's always, it's like a kind of double speak always, because it's not the same. It's not the same technological promise that it's being promoted for the elites and for the people. There will be if this transhumanist technocratic system is implemented like it's being promoted, it will be always a double system, double tire system between the elites and the can I say the slaves, the subjugated and
the unwashed masses.
Yes, the useless eaters that will eat what they will be living in their 15-minute cities, living in pods, eating bugs, all this stuff, taking their injections, being cattle for the elites' experimentations, and then really the elites that will be not submitted to this to these technologies.
No, I agree with you. And with democracy, I'm coming to the realization it's a sham. I'm not voting anymore, and I can vote 3 times in 3 different countries, and I give up. I quit. It's a simulation. And the biblical principles, don't lie, don't steal, all that. Well, voting in my mind in this environment now is you're participating in a lie. It doesn't matter. All the horses, the house wins, right? BlackRock wins. It's like now it's there are Christians that vote, but I'm like, no, it's according to my conscience. I cannot, because I'm participating in a lie. It doesn't matter. They own all the horses. And with my mother long ago, I came to one realization. She grew up in communist Yugoslavia, and she doesn't care for much of politics. She says, just live your daily life. And I think that's also a biblical principle as well, where take it, family, friends, spreading the gospel, but also at the end of the day, politics has become a religion. I think that's related to what you're talking about as well with democracy and what Edmund talks about. And if you look at it from a Croatian perspective, Croatians now live under the European Empire, the Fourth Reich. We entered in 2013 to the EU. From 20 years, we were independent Croatian Republic after the Yugoslav War till 2013. And then before that, we were part of communist Yugoslavia. And even within one generation, your political system changes. And then we were for 3 years a Croatian Nazi regime, right, during World War II. Then we were under the kingdom of the Slovenes, Serbs, and Croats. And then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire, and the Roman empires. It's kind of like you realize what political system you're living under isn't as important as the spiritual, the social. Just any final thought on that?
Yeah, going back to what I said about this distinction between the horizontal and the vertical. So I see that really the only escape is a spiritual insurgency, not the political insurgency. So first, we need to focus on our relationship with God, our spiritual relationship with God, and that will be the basis for any political action. This is very important, I would say. I see it as a form of spiritual insurgency. I have spoken about this a bit in my last presentation on the Chisinau Forum, this idea of a spiritual insurgency. But I see it as the only option that we have. Because there's a hierarchy of can I say, for mankind. The spiritual has primacy over the political and over the worldly. And first, we need to find this spiritual energy, this divine energy that can be attained through our relationship with God, and only then we have the possibility of some political consequences coming out of this.
Yeah, I like how you say spiritual insurgency. I think that's, listeners sometimes, the government sends agents in your podcast chats and comments and promoting these ideas of militias and political violence, and usually it's the government agencies themselves, or some listeners, say let's do physical political sabotage. And no, I think, as you say, it's a spiritual insurgency, and that's one of the reasons that ultimately they attack our religious folks, is because they won't play by the political games. They can't get you in any way, physically or politically, because you ascribe to a higher force, and so then they have to put you in jail or kill you because you won't play the game. And so we've covered a lot. Justino, really great stuff. I think this maybe was my first really in-depth Orthodox take on the podcast. You've got a great X feed. I didn't even know until recently you're also on Telegram. If you want to tell us where are the best places people can find you.
Yeah, people can find me on X under my name. It's the same name that I have there. And on Telegram, we have a small channel there called Esfera Terra. Maybe I don't know if you can put a link for that after, which is a growing operation. I would expect it's a small channel for now, but we plan on having some podcasts as well. Maybe we'll see about that in the future. I have my academic work as well. Have an academia.edu page, and that's pretty much it. I'm active on X. Maybe anything that I plan on doing in the future will be published there and announced there, so people can follow me there.
All right, yeah, your links are in the description, and maybe see you one of these days at a future Justino forum. Thank you for being on the podcast.
That would be great. Thank you.